Well, here we are, my third video on the Legend of Korra. Believe it or not, I hadn't originally planned to do this much. My initial goal had been to talk about how I thought Bolin deserved better, but then I really began analysing the show when I came away with way more opinions on the matter than I thought I would. And so that's how we got where we are now. This has kind of gotten away from me, but I can't deny I've been having fun with it. And now that I've got the entire rest of the cast and the crew out of the way, it's time to get to the villains of the story, because they were made into a huge part of the show, and a lot of the show's issues either stem from or coalesce around these four assholes, and it's time to finally talk about them. I've talked in the last couple of videos about how the difference in format between The Last Airbender and Korra have necessarily altered how the show approaches its characters, and that remains true for the villains. While Atla did have a few recurring villains, such as Azula, the episodic nature of the show lent itself more to a Monster of the Week format, so actual villains were rare, and there was usually just an episodic antagonist, if it had a unique one at all. Zhao and Long Fang were the closest things to arc villains we got, but neither were actually super important in the long run, and the series as a whole built up to Fire Lord Ozai as the big bad boss fight, with the Fire Nation as a farce of imperialism being the antagonist on a thematic and conceptual level. And this all worked really well, largely because it was the plan from the beginning. Meanwhile, Korra was originally planned to be a miniseries, but it got popular enough that it got a second season and then two more, so the first two seasons were made with the idea that there wouldn't be anything afterward, and the third and fourth seasons were made with something of an overarching narrative in mind. However, the series as a whole still functions on a season-to-season approach, and as such, each book has its own isolated conflict and antagonist. And cards on the table, they all kind of suck, but they all suck in different ways, and they're very fun to talk about, so that's what I plan to do. My plan for this video is simple. I'll give a quick rundown of each villain's actions and plans, criticise where it's needed, and then offer up what I think would be an improvement or a fix to their individual problems. This is also where I'll be talking about characters like Hiroshi Sato and the Earth Queen, because their importance to the story is directly tied to the villains of their respective seasons. To be clear, with the partial exception of Unaloq, this is not going to be me suggesting how to fix this story as a whole. This is going to be focused on where the villains themselves failed, so if you're hoping for something like a complete narrative rewrite, I'm afraid I won't be offering that. Not this time at least. Maybe in the future if people are interested. I don't know, comment and tell me if you'd like to see that, I guess. Also, I'd love to hear what you guys thought of the fixes I suggest, and what you'd have done to fix the issues with the villains, so let me know your thoughts in the comments. This video is going to be long as sin, so let's not beat around the bush and just jump right into it, starting with...
And it is well with my soul. You line your pockets full of money that you steal from the poor, and on your way down the hill, you hear me ring that bell, and I said, hell, hell's coming with me.
So, Season 1 actually has a lot of issues to cover, but the general rundown is that Korra arrives in Republic City, fucks around for a while with the Triads and being arrested, and then attends a press conference, to which Amon's response is that they need to accelerate their plans, which they do, 2 episodes later when the Equalists kidnap the Triads and Bolin, and then Mako and Korra need to rescue him. So they attend his super secret, not at all fucking obvious piss filter rally, where he claims that he was granted the power to take away people's spending, which... Yep, he sure can. They grab Bolin and escape, and then Tarlock inflicts himself on the show, and Amon doesn't actually show his face until the end of the next episode, where he spouts cryptic bullshit and knocks Korra out. While this is happening, Asami and her father are introduced. Still the best character intro in the show. Anyway, Amon doesn't actually reappear again for another 2 episodes, where he threatens to do a terrorism if the city doesn't cancel the pro-bending final, which Korra and Lin ensure will happen regardless, and Amon makes good on his threat, with disguised Equalists popping out of the woodwork and knocking people out, as well as giving us one of the funniest moments in the show.
Folks, there is some sort of electrical disturbance in the stands. Metal bender cops are dropping like bumbleflies. There appear to be masked members of the audience wielding strange devices on their hands. One of them is in the booth with me right now, folks. He is leveling one of those glove devices at me now, and I believe he is about to electrocute me. I am currently wetting my pants.
I never mentioned him in the supporting cast video because he has no name, but Announcer Guy is honestly one of my favourite characters. The show should have brought him back for every season, not just the second. Anyway, Amon takes the stage and steals the Wolfbat's bending and... Okay, so I couldn't find a fucking place to put this in the last 2 videos, but what the fuck was even up with the finals match? Like, the cheating was so in-your-face fucking obvious, and the refs were so clearly paid off. What was even the plan there? I don't care how contrived the writing gets, there is no way in hell you can convince me that people would have been fine with that outcome, even if Amon hadn't showed up to embody karma for a whole 30 seconds. Real-life sports fans run a destructive riot if their team loses fairly, and you expect me to believe that nobody was going to be upset by this? What absolute brain-dead contrived bullshit is this? Oh, and Amon announces his intention to equalise the city and then the world. Who cares? He vanishes for the next couple of episodes while Tarlock essentially sets up an apartheid system to oppress non-benders until Amon shows up again, tells him Mom says it's my turn to torment the Avatar, and then throws him in the attic for the rest of the season. Also, Somi's dad is revealed to be an equalist. I'll have more to say about Hiroshi Sato in a bit, because he's essentially the only time the equalist plot is done well at all. Anyway, Amon and his League of Evil Punchmen overthrow the city and force the crew into hiding, while they wait for reinforcements from General Aro, a man who, despite commanding a fleet of warships, will only ever be helpful once, and that's by crashing a plane. His boats get exploded and he hides in the sewers with the crew until they initiate Plan Random Bullshit Go and all run off in different directions. Korra and Mako find Tarlock in the attic cage where he reveals the horrible truth. Amon has daddy issues. Oh, and he's a fucking liar with psychic blood bending that somehow allows him to seal other people's bending. No, this is never explained, nor does psychic blood bending ever come up again. Anyway, Amon finds them, steals Korra's bending, Korra air punches him out of the fucking window, and then everyone sees him waterbend and he decides he's had enough of being a revolutionary and just wants to spend the rest of his life exploring the world with his brother. At the bottom of the ocean. And yeah, that's Amon. He kind of sucks. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, but let's start with the fact that there is no systemic oppression of non-benders in the show, and Amon and the Equalists just make it up. Yeah, that's the point, Written. He's a liar with a grudge against benders. No, that is the problem. See, Amon and the Equalists largely represent equality movements and socialism as told by an idiot who doesn't understand what socialism is, but they're also a direct parallel to the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was formed to protest economic inequality and wealth hoarding, which are both things that have only gotten worse in the years since. And a common claim by bigots is that oppressed groups are lying about being oppressed and or oppressing themselves. And Korra takes what was at the time a present movement and presents them as little more than thugs being directed by a conman, which is about as close to propaganda as you can get. One of the biggest problems with Season 1 is that until Tarlock steps in and starts his police state, there is no actual oppression happening. None that the viewer is allowed to see, at least. You are told there is, but all we ever see is the triads bullying some shopkeepers and the police doing fucking nothing about it. So as far as the viewer is actually shown, there is no fucking oppression. And it's like this because Bright didn't think Occupy Wall Street was a movement with any merit, which just goes to show how disconnected from reality these old white men are. A close parallel to this would be the White Fang from Ruby, which was an allusion to Black Lives Matters, as told by two white guys with zero writing chops and no actual knowledge on the issues of racial inequality, but who thought that systemic racism just doesn't exist, and that protesters are just assholes who get in the way when you're trying to drive to work. Just a quick FYI, it's generally a bad idea to make an equality movement the bad guys in your story, because it always ends up saying a lot more about you than it does about them, and it never says anything good. But the lack of on-screen oppression doesn't just reveal Brike's idiocy and lack of political literacy, it also doesn't work from a story standpoint, because if there's no actual oppression, then where the fuck did all of Amon's followers come from? Show don't tell isn't an absolute rule, but if you're going to focus so much of the story on this, you do need to show us something, because otherwise, where the hell did all these people fucking come from? Outside of Amon, the vast majority of the Equalists are true believers, and all those people didn't just materialize out of the fucking ether. Hell, Mustache Kelprod guy even turns on Amon when he finds out he was a liar the whole time, and he was Amon's right-hand guy. So there's a massive contradiction in the story here, where we're told by multiple sources that inequality is a problem, and there's enough people to show that it is, but Amon is also a liar and the movement immediately falls apart without him, which makes the entire thing seem like he just made it up. Oh, and to top it all off, the Equalists actually do cause a change in the system, as the council is removed and the people democratically elect a president, and then everything is just fixed. So what's the actual message here? There's also the problem that Amon himself just doesn't fucking work. Setting aside the problem of psychic bloodbending as a whole, Amon's character is incredibly underwhelming and kind of nonsensical. His entire motivation, as explained by Tarlock, because God knows we can't trust anything that comes out of Amon's fat fucking V cosplaying mouth, is that he always believed in inequality, but their dad abused them, which led him to rebel, and then he's just evil because...
Run away? But what about Mom? We can't just leave her.
He was right about you. You are a weakling.
Just because, I guess. There's no rhyme or reason to his attitude here. He just decides that bending is evil, and then he learns how to take people's bending away off screen, and then he's just everyone's problem. And all because the writers think that's how the cycle of abuse works. The Equalist plot just sucks on every level, with two notable exceptions, Hiroshi Sato and Amon's effect on Korra. See, Amon only really works when he's haunting Korra's nightmares, because Korra loves her role, but she thinks that being able to bend multiple elements is what fundamentally makes her the Avatar. And so on paper, a villain that can take people's bending away like Amon can is actually really interesting, because it should force her to reconcile the fact that she's more than just her bending, and that would have been a really interesting angle to explore. In her 10-year retrospective video, Lily Archett mentioned that Amon would have worked better if he'd just been the anti-bending equivalent to a serial killer, rather than a false revolutionary, and that actually stuck out to me because I think it could have worked really well, especially if it was tied into Asami's dad. Like I said earlier, Hiroshi Sato is the only time the Equalist plot really works, because he's filled with a kind of grief and anger that real-life hate groups capitalize on to recruit people to their cause, but it's never really explored outside of the very few interactions he has with Asami after his terrorism ties are revealed, and he's just kind of used to hand-wave away how the Equalists are so well-equipped and funded. But I think he should have played a much bigger role in the story. I think he should have been the brains behind the operation as a whole, and the co-villain of the series. My proposal to fix the villains of Season 1 is essentially to just make Amon what was suggested, the anti-bending equivalent to a serial killer. A man who strikes without warning and steals people's bending while using the survivors to spread word of his deeds and manifesto, and I'd make Hiroshi the one bankrolling and sheltering him. More importantly though, I'd actually have the Equalist movement exist as a separate organisation from Amon, and it actually shows some of the forms of systemic issues as well. I'd include things like non-bending factory workers losing their jobs because people like Mako can just generate electricity with their bare hands, and that's cheaper overall. I'd have the police force very obviously treat Korra differently upon realizing she was a bender when they arrived at the scene. Show them treating the shopkeepers very differently. Obviously there should be more, but these are just some of the examples of the issues that could be brought up by the Equalists that they want addressed and fixed. This wouldn't just fix the problems of there being no on-screen proof and the original plot demonizing the objectively good existence of equality movements, but it would also make the Equalists feel like more than just a bunch of masked goons and one annoying guy with a soapbox and a bunch of flyers. What's more, it would give Amon and Hiroshi an actual movement to co-opt. Hiroshi very obviously doesn't actually care about the lives of non-benders, he just wants to make someone pay for the death of his wife, and Amon's the same, just with daddy issues instead. So the two of them essentially latching on to a legitimate equality movement like the leeches they are makes more sense, and it would also reflect how bad actors always show up to protests to try to cause harm. And Amon's ability to actually steal bending would inspire a lot of angry people to start fighting more violently, because he can literally take away the weapons of their oppressors, and he'd essentially be able to steal away members of the Equalists to act as his accomplices, and it would be these people Hiroshi would be supplying weapons to. Additionally, when Tarlock pulls his police state bullshit, it would push even more people into joining Amon's militia, because if they're going to start actively rounding up innocent people and treating them all like criminals, it's going to push people into action. And this should be a point Korra brings up when she confronts him in his office, that he's only going to make more people desperate enough to choose violence. You wouldn't even have to change much of what follows, just make it clear that this kind of action will only make things worse. I'd keep the final confrontation between Asami and her father the same, but I'd include him in a lot more scenes to make it clear that he's more than just a weapon supplier. Asami being forced to accept that hatred has turned her father into a monster is still a really good scene, and I think it would just hit a little bit harder if we got to see him taking part in the damage his involvement was causing. Finally, I'd actually have Amon gain his ability to steal bending from a spirit. The water tribes are situated close to the spirit portals, and he fucked off in the middle of a blizzard, so it's not a complete impossibility that he could have come across one that was sympathetic, or at the very least mischievous. Not only would this fix the problem of how the fuck does a bloodbender energy bend when only the Avatar should be able to do that, but it would also lead into the conflicts of the second season quite nicely. I know the seasons were made in isolation, but if I'm making fixes, this is something I'd like to change. I don't think my propositions would fix all of Amon's issues, but I think they go a long way to making him suck less overall. It's hard to fix a story that's constructed from shit from the ground up, but yeah, that's what I've got for Amon, a complete idiot's interpretation of socialism and equality movements. Out of all 4 villains in The Legend of Korra, Unaloq is the one that I found not just bad, but disappointing, and that's because he and the season as a whole start out with so much promise and a premise more interesting than almost any other show I've ever seen, only to piss it all away in the name of retconning lore and forcing a villain into a story that it just doesn't work in. Unaloq is the chief of the Northern Water Tribe and the de facto leader of the Southern Water Tribe. See, because the Southern Tribe was essentially obliterated by the events of the 100-Year War, the Northern Tribe ended up putting a lot of resources into helping them rebuild, which left their chief as the South's chief. The two tribes have always been separate entities and were even referred to as sisters, and because the Southern Tribe was being rebuilt while Republic City was coming into being, they ended up sharing more with the United Republic than any other nation, right down to focusing on economic growth over cultural growth and using the yuan for currency. This has, however, posed a problem in spiritual matters. Because the water tribes are located so close to the spirit portals, they have a unique relationship to the spirits, and it's implied that the water tribes have a responsibility to handle certain spiritual matters because of this. However, the complete neglect of the Southern Tribe's spiritual duties has left the spirits angry, and the Southern Gate has been closed and surrounded by a permanent blizzard as a result. This issue is initially why Unaloq is at the Southern Tribe at all, and it's also what makes him such an interesting character at first. Unaloq is very learned on spiritual matters, to the point that he not only understands the nature of spirits and the gates, but has rediscovered the use of bending to help calm spirits when they go dark. I actually hate this point more than you know, but I'll get into that later. Unaloq's arrival at the South Pole also reveals to Korra just how much has been kept from her, and he offers to be her tutor in all things spiritual, which her dad immediately shoots down like the incensed asshole that he is.
It would be my honor to instruct you in the spiritual ways of the Water Tribe.
I wouldn't mind learning about fighting spirits. Airbending is getting pretty boring.
Tenzin is Korra's instructor. He can give her all the training she needs.
So you've said.
This sets up the main conflict of the first part of the season, as Talnrock and Unaloq have an incredibly strained relationship brought about by Talnrock destroying a sacred forest in his youth and pissing off the spirits, which is what got him banished from the North Pole to begin with. The brothers butt heads all throughout the first few episodes, with Talnrock's inability to respect his daughter's autonomy repeatedly pissing her off and driving her away. Unaloq, meanwhile, shows Korra a level of respect nobody else has, actually trusting her to do her job and encouraging her to trust herself.
The Avatar must go alone.
But I don't have any connection with the spirits. In fact, it seems like they hate me.
You have to believe in yourself, like I believe in you. What is it?
I guess I'm just so used to people telling me how to do things that I forgot what it was like to have someone trust in me.
Korra, all the past avatars live on inside of you. Let them guide you. Let them help you find the light in the dark.
This leads to Korra opening the Southern Gate, though the celebration is cut short by Unaloq moving to occupy the Southern Tribe with his troops. Tensions escalate and Korra repeatedly has to play peacekeeper, as well as talk Unaloq down from more drastic measures. Meanwhile, members of the Southern Tribe begin plotting to overthrow the Northern Chief, and when they fail to do so, Unaloq calls in a judge to hold a trial for the kidnappers, as well as Korra's parents. The judge initially calls for their execution, but is talked down to simply banishing all but Korra's mother. Smelling a rat, Korra chases the judge down and threatens to have Naga play fetch with his entrails if he doesn't confess to the obvious fuckery going on, to which he immediately admits that the trial was a sham and Unaloq put him up to getting rid of Tarlock. And this is where all the potential of the season gets flushed down the fucking toilet. From here, Unaloq is revealed to actually be an evil mastermind who is only pretending to be on Korra's side and be more reasonable to better control her, and he's also the reason her father was banished from the North Pole to begin with. Oh, and there's also the great spirit of light and darkness, and Unaloq wants to free the evil kite to rule the world, and also harmonic convergence, the first avatar, and I'm not even going to bother recapping the rest, you fucking know how this goes. Tree, Spirit Kaiju, Jinora saves the day, and blah blah blah. I hate everything about this. Okay, first problem with all this. The Vaatu plot is completely fucking stupid. You know it, I know it, everyone knows it. The premise that the first 3 episodes set up, the actual Civil War storyline, is one of the best I've ever seen in my life. It's a story where neither side is strictly in the right and everyone involved is making a bad situation worse, and taking a nuanced look at it would have made it one of the most actually mature works of animation in the world, because it would have to actually sit down and have something to say about it. People would have been debating the outcome for years, and that would have been good. A good Civil War story is messy and hard to do because it necessitates both sides being kind of right and kind of wrong. But I guess Bright got intimidated by that particular challenge, because halfway through episode 4 they suddenly jerk the wheel to veer onto the exit to Conspiracy City, and suddenly Unaloq, who was a really interesting character, is just turned into a Satanist who wants to bring about 10,000 years of darkness for reasons, and I hate it. I hate that they took a character with some actually intriguing things to say and made everything a lie because the devil made him do it. Rava and Vaatu were a terrible story decision, but honestly, everything they did with the spirits in this season is just shit. I'd actually like to recommend you watch this video about the Unicorn of War, because they go into the issues with the spirits in a lot of detail, and I'd honestly just be repeating a lot of the same points here if I tried to cover everything myself. But to be brief, the spirits of The Last Airbender were never good or evil. Spirits like Heibai or Ko, though seemingly acting with malice, could not be considered good or evil because those are human concepts and the spirits were concerned with more esoteric matters. This is what TV Tropes calls blue and orange morality, and the logic the spirits followed tended to be unique to them, such as how Ko, despite wanting to steal people's faces, would never just overpower someone, didn't lie, and always kept his word. But Rava and Vaatu throw that idea out the window and just make everything about light and darkness, and if a spirit has too much darkness, they turn evil until they get it balanced out by wibbly golden water. And while this superficially resembles the concept of yin and yang, let's not kid ourselves, this is moral dualism wearing the skin of Taoism. This is just Jesus and Satan as annoying kites, and taking the complexity of the spirits, beings with their own morality and logic and personality, and simplifying them to just good or evil is boring. This is really boring, and it makes spirits way less interesting, because while in The Last Airbender they could be talked to and reasoned with, here they just go dark and purple and turn into blobby murder machines, and it's boring. I'm bored. This is boring. This guy is especially boring.
Stop being so boring!
I know a lot of people really liked Beginnings, but I can't fucking stand it for taking the very concept of the spirits and shitting it the fuck up, and also force a villain into a plot that didn't need one. But it doesn't stop there, because in doing all this, they also fucked with the origin of bending. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail here because I'm planning to make another video on the subject itself, but in trying to explain how everything started, Beginnings makes bending less interesting. The Last Airbender established that the first benders learned how from the masters of the natural world, from dragons and the moon, and this made bending more interesting because it tied into the overall message of the beauty and value of the world as a whole. But Beginnings is just like, they got it from turtles, the end. I don't care for this approach is my point. So how would I fix this? Well, it's very simple. I would completely remove Rava and Vatu and even Wan from the equation at all, and just make it what it promised to be from the start, a story about a civil war between two tribes, the ramifications of which could potentially threaten the stability of the world as a whole. Going into this video, I decided I didn't want to try to just change the kinds of story being told with each villain, because I think that complaining that a story is different from the kind of story you want it to be is really lazy criticism. But I'm allowing myself this one as a treat, because all I'm doing is exploring the story that they initially promised us at the beginning of the season, not making up something from whole cloth. Unaloq works so much better if he's a well-meaning but flawed man trying to do what he legitimately thinks is best for his people, but constantly allowing his terrible relationship with his brother to colour his decisions. Because the thing is, he's not entirely wrong about the Water Tribe's responsibility to the Spirit Gates. They do need to be maintained, and the world definitely needs to be more in harmony with the spirits. That's a truth that we've seen in The Last Airbender as well. But the way he's going about it, bringing an occupying army and essentially trying to forcefully assimilate the Southern Tribe, is the worst possible way to do it. His character flaws work best in this role, and they're what makes it so hard for him to get along with his brother. Similarly, Tonrock. Okay, quick side note, would it have honestly killed Bright to give him a different fucking name? Between Tonrock here and Tarlock in Season 1, I've had to recheck my scripts 50 fucking times to make sure I'm using the right fucking names, and I'm at the end of my rope. This is like that time I was running a D&D campaign and my friends named their characters Nika, Naka, and Nadja. It feels like a conspiracy against me and my inability to remember names correctly. Alright, sorry, back on topic. Like I was saying, Tonrock's character flaws are also integral to the conflict. He's impulsive, has no respect for spiritual matters, and quite a temper. And these are important because they're traits he shares with Korra. This is something Korra should recognise, and it should lead to character growth as she witnesses firsthand how the inability to temper such traits can lead to a greater conflict. Something I actually really liked about the season before it went off the rails is how Korra was continually able to convince Unaloq to take less drastic actions. It was one of the things that proved that she won't just be a good avatar, but that she already is one. But by making Unaloq a liar, it instead makes her out to be a gullible fool, and once again, that's boring. What I think should happen is, instead of confronting Unaloq at the prison and revealing him to be evil, Korra should call him out for lying, and he should explain that he believes that Tonrock will act as too much of a destabilizing force, especially in a time when they're trying to establish unity, not just between the tribes, but with the spirits. Korra would obviously argue with him on this, and I think that she would be able to make some genuinely good points about how trying to control the Southern Tribe will only push them into fighting back. See, I think having the two brothers both want what's best for the tribes, but having different ideas about what is best and allowing their animosity to get in the way of actually thinking things through would be a great way to escalate the conflict. Nobody fights like family, and the conflict with the Water Tribes is already forming a strong parallel with the B-plot of Tenzin, Kaya, and Bumi and their own familial reconciliation. Hell, the tribes are even referred to as sisters. Family is a recurring theme throughout the show as a whole, and exploring that further here instead of going with the fight between Jesus and the devil for 10,000 years of free chocolate or 10,000 years of eternally wet socks would have made for a much stronger plot. Keeping the stakes more personal would allow the story to hit much harder, and it would also mean that the show doesn't escalate from the peace of Republic City in the first season to the end of the fucking world in the second, before dropping back down again for season 3. The stakes don't need to be so fucking high all the time, and I know the first 2 seasons were made with the impression that there wouldn't be anything afterwards, but that still doesn't call for the stakes to go so high. The Civil War story would have been perfect if they'd stuck with it, because while the fate of both tribes would be on the line, it would be funneled through the conflict of Korra's family, and giving the viewer something so personal to latch onto would make it hit even harder, because everyone's dealt with familial conflicts, which are almost always small but still feel like the most important thing in the world. Anyway, from here, I'd have the brothers and their respective tribes continue to escalate the conflicts, and I think I'd have Korra seek wisdom in the spirit realm. In the original version, she meets Iroh, and I'd love to keep that. I think his wisdom would be a huge boon, and you could even keep Jinora as a spirit guide. Just have the nature of the spirit realm as a whole lead to them being separated, instead of Unaloq sending evil dark spirits to split them apart. Jinora could even come across that grumpy spider, and you could have that be the reason she's in the Fog of Lost Souls. As I said earlier, I'd completely get rid of Rava and Vatu, but I'd also get rid of Beginnings as a whole. I'd replace it with a conversation with either Iroh or another spirit, where Korra learns that it was a prior avatar that decided to separate the spirit and material worlds because they thought it was best overall. And yes, I would get rid of Wan as the first avatar. I know this is something that fandoms have a hard time understanding, but not everything needs to be mapped out and explained. The avatar cycle as a whole was only made less interesting by explaining where it started, and it never needed an explanation to begin with. Anyway, I would have the fighting escalate until Tonraq and Unaloq are legitimately trying to kill each other, and then I would have Korra intervene in the fight, but I wouldn't have them actually stop. No, I'd turn it into a three-way fight with the two men trying to kill each other and Korra trying to stop them, redirecting attacks, tying them down, just doing everything she can to get in the way until she's completely fed up and goes into the avatar state to really knock some sense into them. I think the fight should rage across the spirit world and end with the three at the Tree of Time, where they'd look into it and witness the carnage of the war between the tribes, which would be just the sobering reminder of the actual consequences of a civil war that the brothers need to get the fuck over themselves and realize that things have gone too far, and just in time for harmonic convergence. From here, I'd have Tenzin and the others catch up and have Korra break down with the knowledge that it's too late to stop so many people from being killed, and then I'd have Tenzin guide her into utilizing the tree to go into Spirit Kaiju mode, not to fight the Dark Avatar, but to stop the fighting altogether. Imagine Spirit Korra teleporting onto the battlefield and halting the combat, maybe wresting control of the water being used to fight, and instead using it as some kind of mass healing wave that pushes people apart and mends their wounds, something to save as many lives as possible, while mitigating the damage. Kind of like the end of Book 1 of The Last Airbender, just with less death and no moon murder. To end everything, I think Korra should decide on her own to keep the gates open and use harmonic convergence to reunite the two worlds. That would lead into the events of Book 3 much better, and it would also give people a reason to be upset with her about the spirit wilds. In the original version, Raiko was just throwing a tantrum because Unaloq wrecked the city, and the side effects of Korra saving the world were an inconvenience. But this would actually make the wilds her responsibility, and not just something she decided to do because reasons. I'd also keep the tribes separate, because I don't like the idea of cultural assimilation. Unaloq could then step down as the chieftain of the North, and his kids could take his place if you really need them to, and Tonraq would get elected to lead the South as he already was, and Korra would have been the avatar who not only brought back the spirits, but brought peace to the water tribes. I know there are those who won't like my suggestions because there's no villain to fight, and some people find the idea of not having a villain to be profane heresy. But the story would have worked so much better if Unaloq was just a fallible guy who wanted the best for his people, and not a Kingdom Hearts boss. But if you really do insist on having a villain for the story, Varric is right there. A skeevy war profiteer playing both sides to make money is a much better antagonist for the story than the fucking devil. Overall, Unaloq is just an ocean of missed potential, and it makes me sad that he was the villain at all.
We're great at crime.
Don't call us dog!
Yeah, we're great at crime.
He stole the bubble gum.
The boys in blue are here for you. There is nothing they can do. Scruffle, scratch, skedaddle up a creek without a paddle. No, you cannot rattle us, cause we are great at crime.
So, Season 3 starts with the world in a rather drastic period of change. Harmonic convergence has not only created pockets of spirit wilds and made the spirits permanent residents of the material plane, but it's also created a bunch of new airbenders. And while this is great for restoring balance and making Tenzin the happiest man on the planet, it's also granted airbending to an idiot with a Narcon. This is Zahir, and his deal is that he's a short-sighted idiot with no personality of his own.
The idea of having nations and governments is as foolish as keeping the human and spirit realms separate.
You've had to deal with a moronic president and a tyrannical queen. Don't you think the world would be better off if leaders like them were eliminated?
You know, I had this complete moron try to argue that Korra isn't trying to be a political show, and the deluded idiot even tried to argue that Zahir isn't an anarchist because he never actually says the word anarchy. I'll give you a moment to get over just how stupid that argument is. I know I needed one. They said a lot more, but I'm not actually here to subject you to the fractally wrong ramblings of someone who would have flunked out of kindergarten if it were possible. I'm here to subject you to my idiot ramblings instead. But yes, the political and philosophical topic of the day is anarchy. Each of the books has one. It's just that this one is done the best because it's already so stupid, there wasn't really any room to mess it up further. Anyway, while Zahir is technically the primary antagonist of the season, he shares that spot with the rest of the Red Lotus, an anarchist terrorist group with no actually understood or explored motivation, and very little to actually do in the plot. But they can fight real good, so at least they have that, I guess. What sets Season 3 apart from the rest of the series is that the main villains actually play a surprisingly minor role in it, as most of the season is spent either on the New Air Nation, dealing with the Earth Queen, or the Beifong family drama happy fun time hour. Zahir and the Red Lotus actually don't do very much until over halfway through the season. They're kind of superfluous to the plot. Zahir starts the season by escaping from his prison thanks to his new airbending skills, which he's automatically amazing at, natch, and then he spends the next few episodes getting the band back together before he infiltrates the New Air Nation, gets clocked almost immediately because he's a massive idiot, and then tries to kidnap Korra from Zaofu, which they fail at and have to retreat from. It's soon revealed that Su Yin's truthseer, Ai Wei, was also a member of the Red Lotus, so the crew tracks him down and Korra meditates into the spirit world to confront him, while Mako and Bolin duke it out with Gazan and Ming Hua for all of about 30 seconds before they get their asses handed to them and get captured to use as leverage. Korra and Asami are captured by Earth Kingdom forces, so the Red Lotus heads to Ba Sing Se to try to trick the Queen before Zahir decides, fuck it, Regicide go, and kills her. I've actually got a lot to say about this particular plot point, so we'll come back to this later. Anyway, the unscheduled suffocation caused the Earth Kingdom to fall into chaos, and Zahir and his chaos-loving chums decide to take the Airbenders hostage to force an ultimatum onto Korra, which leads to Tenzin sacrificing himself to hold them off. And this is still honestly one of the best and hardest to watch scenes, as they beat him within an inch of his life.
Give up. It's over.
As long as I'm breathing, it's not over.
Chills. Korra agrees to Zahir's demands, but because nobody trusts him, half of the cast go to try to catch him off guard, leading to Pili getting her mind blown as she fights the Beifong sisters. Zahir unlocks the power of flight, and then the rest of the season is essentially just a snuff film as Korra's tortured into the Avatar state, Ming Hua gets electrocuted to death on screen, and Gazan just fucking kills himself. All that's left is for Korra to chase Zahir across the mountains and nearly get suffocated before another Jinora ex machina saves her, and then the season ends with Korra in a wheelchair and Zahir modelling for Dungeon magazines. God, where do I begin with this? Okay, so one of the biggest problems with the Red Lotus is that none of the members have any real personality. Even Zahir, the mainest of antagonists of the season, has basically nothing but anarchist ramblings and spewing airbender philosophy to his name. He doesn't even have a motivation to speak of. Actually, Raiden, he does have a motivation. He wants to kill the Earth Queen and the Avatar. Those are not motivations voiced in my head, those are goals. I went over this with Mako. A motivation is the reason behind wanting something, not the desire for something itself. Why does he think that there shouldn't be kings or queens? Why does he think the Avatar cycle should end? Why did he join the Red Lotus at all? None of these things are ever explored in the slightest. He just goes on rants, kills the Queen, and then tries to kill Korra, and we never know why. Hell, most of the Red Lotus barely even have speaking roles. They only really exist to be fought in the climax. They're basically just boss fights. And this is a shame because they're actually really cool in concept. Gazan introduces us to lava bending, Ming Hua can waterbend with no fucking arms, and Pili can alter the trajectory of her combustion shots. But outside of the conversation they have with Bolin, the fact that two of them are dating, and Gazan preferring death to imprisonment, none of them function as real characters.
Mostly I just made up stories about the guards, who was having trouble with his girlfriend, which one secretly wished he'd become a pastry chef.
Ooh, okay, that sounds like fun. Let me try that on you guys. You were raised by an older sister. Your mustache grew in when you were 10, and I'm sensing, just sensing, an unspoken attraction between you two.
2 out of 3. It's not bad.
2 out of... Wait, which 2? Fucking tell me, you shitheads, I wanna know! This is a problem that none of the other antagonists in the series have. Sure, most of them are pretty basic, but they at least have personalities to work off of. But Zahir and the Red Lotus have less character than the announcer dude in season 1, less even than Tano, and that really drags them down. What's absolutely hilarious though is that Zahir, for all his spouting of philosophy, is a complete fucking idiot. And not just because he's an anarchist either, although that certainly doesn't do him any favours. No, Zahir is just stupid. Take the time he spends infiltrating the new Air Nation. A smart person would try to blend in, to make themselves innocuous. But he just cannot stop showing off how good he is at airbending, nor can he stop spouting philosophy long enough to not be the single most suspicious motherfucker on the planet. It takes Kaya being alone in a room with him for less than 30 seconds to suss him out. And you know what? You watch their interaction and try to tell me where he obviously fucks up.
You seem to know a lot about airbender history for someone who just got airbending.
I've always admired the culture.
And you moved through those gates like a natural. Where did you say you were from?
A small village up north. You've probably never heard of it.
Wait. Zahir.
Aside from being so suspicious a blind dog would bark at him, Zahir's cover story is, you haven't heard of it. A smart person would have claimed to be from the Earth Kingdom, since they had just rescued a bunch of airbenders from the Dai Li, and someone who had escaped the not-so-secret police on their own would probably be acting off for a while anyway. It would have been the perfect cover. In fact, they should have actually made him be from Ba Sing Se, for reasons I'll explain in a moment. But Zahir's stupidity doesn't end here, because in Season 4, he admits that he didn't think that the chaos of the Earth Queen's death would lead to a dictator like Kuvira rising up to take power, despite the fact that a worse ruler taking power is the most common outcome of anarchy. I've mostly danced around the subject until now, but let me make one thing clear. The problem isn't just that Zahir's anarchy doesn't work, it's that it was never going to work, because anarchy doesn't fucking work. As much as the 13-year-olds and the people who have never mentally matured past the age of 13 would love for you to believe otherwise, anarchy is not and has never been a viable system for humans to thrive under, because anarchy is nothing but a state of violent transition between one form of leadership to another, and it's antithetical to human nature anyway. While you can argue over freedom versus security all damn day, the fact of the matter is that humans are social creatures, and it's in our nature to seek leadership when grouped together because it's the most efficient way to tie the group together. Whether it's a single leader or a council, humans will always trend towards putting someone in charge to help make groups more stable. And if the leader is corrupt, the solution isn't let's get rid of leaders, it's holding those leaders accountable. But the problem isn't necessarily that Zahir is an anarchist, it's that he's given no motivation to be one. Like I said, the members of the Red Lotus have no fucking motivation behind their actions. And even in lore, nobody knew what the hell their actual grievances were. And I can't fix all of them, because like I said, most aren't even real characters, but I can definitely fix the problem with Zahir, and it all comes back to the Earth Queen. Regardless of your feelings on the monarchy, it really can't be disputed that Hu Ting is the single worst villain in the entirety of the show. She's a greedy monarch who has spent her tenure as queen strangling her people with unjust taxation and an iron-fisted rule, leaving the majority of her kingdom on the brink of starvation to uphold her unreasonably decadent lifestyle. She has no bending or personal strength to speak of, her power is entirely systemic, and she uses it to starve her people, forcibly enlist them into a personal army, and just be the most caustic bitch you've ever laid your fucking eyes on. She is killing her people, and she's doing it happily. Of all the characters in this mess of a show, she deserves death more than anyone else, and I think this is where Zahir should be coming from. If I were to change one thing, I would explicitly make Zahir from Ba Sing Se, and I'd have had him grow up in the Earth's Queen's tyrannical rule. It would serve to explain why he doesn't believe in queens or rulers of any kind, and it could also be used to explain why he thinks they should get rid of the Avatar. Throughout the series, it's been made pretty clear that the Avatar is expected to be the check on power for rulers that are out of control. But it's pretty clear that Aang never bothered to do anything about this bitch. And growing up in the kind of systemic cruelty created by Hu Ting's rule, watching the people he loved starve to death or be beaten or killed by the Dai Li, that would definitely serve to radicalize a young Zahir into joining the anarchist ranks of the Red Lotus. Hell, the fact that the Avatar never came to put a stop to Hu Ting's bullshit, even though Aang stopped the Fire Lord, would explain why he thinks the Avatar is useless, and a personal grudge against the idea of a role is a lot more motivation than the fucking nothing we have right now. It would also explain why, despite his fucking reverence for air nomad culture, he's willing to burn it all down when it's just starting to come back. Because he wouldn't see it as a real thing, he'd see it as the Avatar's new air nation, just another creation of the one that left him to suffer. The second thing I would change is how the poison functions and is administered. I've gone over this before, specifically in my video on the crew, but the way Korra is treated in the season 3 finale is absolutely disgusting. I wasn't joking with my snuff film comment earlier. The way the camera zooms in on Korra's suffering face and how it forces us to watch the process of the poison being absorbed through her skin in such agonizing detail, it's practically pornographic in the amount of focus put on her suffering. They should never have gone this far. I've heard people argue that Korra is just a more mature and violent show, but I'd like to remind you that just a couple episodes prior, Tenzin had the absolute shit kicked out of him by the Red Lotus, and the camera still panned away to give him some semblance of dignity. No one else in the entirety of the series has had their suffering treated like a spectacle in the way Korra does, and it's fucking gross that they handle it like this. What I would do is actually make the injection point of the poison happen when they trank her back in Zaofu, but I'd have had the deadlier part be a secondary effect hidden by the paralysis. I'd then make the symptoms of it slowly increase in severity over the course of the following episodes until it's weakened her enough that it's the actual reason Zahir manages to knock her out so easily when they confront him. From there, I'd replace the ooze bending scene with another dart, just filled with a far more potent version of the toxin. It would still have the same effect of forcing her into the Avatar state, and it would still be metallic in nature, but it would be a lot more dignified and way less fetishistic in how it portrays her suffering. The final change I would make, and this is probably where people will disagree with me the most, is that I'd have Korra kill Zahir. I'm completely serious. You know that scene where he's up to his neck in rock and starts screaming about how chaos is the natural order and all that bullshit? A single clench of her fist and his head pops right off. Just end the bastard. The only reason the writers keep Zahir alive at all, and also the reason they make the poison scene so traumatic, is so that they can shove her in a room with him when they do the PTSD plotline in season 4, so he can gaslight her into the spirit world. I fucking hate this scene, by the way. You can practically hear the writers jacking it for how clever they're being. Oh, it's symbolic of how she has to confront her abusers to overcome her trauma. Fuck all the way off to hell with that. Nobody should be forced to face their abuser, especially alone with them in a locked room. Just kill the fucker and be done with it. Besides, they kill off every other named member of the Red Lotus. Mako gives Minghua the bug zapper treatment, Gazan chooses death before imprisonment, and Peli's head explodes. Fuck, even Aiwei's obviously dead, considering his body is left without a spirit, which means he'll either starve to death or suffer the shutdown of his nervous system. This season's honestly just a bloodbath. This does mean that the poison and meditation issues of season 4 need to be handled a different way, but in this hypothetical fixed version I'm crafting, Rawa already isn't a thing, and I'll get into the poison solution in just a few minutes, so neither is really an issue. The Red Lotus and Zahir could have been more interesting if any effort was put into their characterization at all, but ultimately they're just let down by their execution. So, season 4 starts with a 3-year time skip, with Korra having been out of commission, trying to recover, and then backpacking across the Earth Kingdom dealing with hallucinations caused by the residual poison, and the actual plot being handled by everyone else. The Earth Queen's death left the nation in a state of shattered chaos, and so Kuvira has been charged with unifying the fractured nation states with the goal of putting Prince Wu on the throne when all the hard work has been done. People originally wanted Su Yin to handle the reunification, but as I mentioned in my last video, she has a sudden stupid attack and refuses for no reason at all, and so the United Republic places Kuvira in charge after she takes back Ba Sing Se. I'm honestly of two minds about Kuvira. She shares a lot of problems with the first two villains of the show, but she's also my favourite of the bunch. And the thing about her is that she was just a normal person before stepping up when Su wouldn't. She wasn't a governor or the Avatar or even really a leader. She was just someone who saw the trouble her home was in and decided to fucking do something about it. And I think this would have been a far more interesting angle to explore than what they actually went with. A lot of people make vague claims about her being an evil dictator, but she never actually does anything to make the viewer believe this for a long time. She speaks ominously when dealing with the bandits, but at all other times, she's actually fairly reasonable. Take her interaction with the governor of Yai, for example.
Agree to the terms, and you'll have the full force of my army backing you. You will remain in charge, just under my supervision. I will save your life and the lives of your citizens. I think that's pretty generous.
I know how you manipulate states and force them to join up under you. I know the only reason you want this region is because it's rich in ore. They might call you the Great Uniter, but you're destroying everything. I'll never turn the great state of Yai over to you.
You have a lot of pride, but it cannot protect your people. Your pride will not stop the hordes as your city crumbles to the ground. And your pride certainly will not feed your hungry when all that is left is rubble.
Leave! Get out of my state!
You will perish. Unless you take my generous offer.
I know this is supposed to be framing her as strong-arming him, but she's entirely correct in everything she says. This mostly just reads as what normally happens when two leaders try to jockey for control. And let's be honest, the claim, you just want this region because it's rich in ore, doesn't hold up, because her job is to unite the entirety of the nation, and the resources in question don't actually factor into that. Are they important for leaders to consider? Absolutely. Does that fundamentally change her actual task in any way? Fuck no, it doesn't. And while all this is happening, we're treated to a wonderful collage of scenes with Prince Wu being a piece of shit that nobody in their right mind would trust with any degree of power, and it appears Raiko agrees with me on that.
You sure that's the guy you want running the Earth Kingdom?
Trust me, we'll be sending a delegation of experienced advisors to handle day-to-day governing.
Raiko straight up admits they're planning on turning the Earth Kingdom into a puppet state. What's more, the stated goal of reunification is to give power back to the royal family. The same royal family that was already destroying the nation before Zahir blew it up. This would have been a perfect reason for leaders not to want to give power to Kuvira, but it's never even acknowledged until she gives her speech about the new Earth Empire, and we're expected to believe she's gone too far. By not giving power over to this jackass, you've gotta be fucking kidding me. The issue here is that the writers clearly didn't intend for people to see Raiko's plans as the nefarious bullshit that they are. And that brings us to the problem of the United Republic in general. See, the United Republic is clearly meant to be the Avatar equivalent to America, right down to having its own president and Statue of Liberty. This is why the United Republic is framed as the center of morality and progress within the show, because it's where the writers are from, and obviously that makes it the best. And I honestly just do not have the energy to go into all the ways this impacts the show right now, so I'm just going to focus on what's relevant to this season, that being Kuvira wanting to take it back. Something I didn't mention when I talked about the Earth Queen is how she remarked that the United Republic was built on stolen Earth Kingdom territory, and yeah, it is. I'm sorry if you were hoping for a more nuanced or extensive analysis of her claim, but no, it's literally the only time she's correct about anything. Check the wiki if you don't believe me. But the reason Breik introduced the idea via Hu Ting's rancid ramblings is because they're priming the viewer to perceive the claim as inherently evil, so that when someone else brings it up, you immediately perceive them as being evil too. This was already pretty gross back in the 2010s, but we're living in a time where the understanding of the consequences of settler colonialism has never been more widespread, so this has aged like already spoiled milk. This circles back to Kuvira, because she also states the United Republic is on stolen territory, just like the real America, and her goal to retake the land is ultimately what pushes the season into its final conflict. The thing about Kuvira is that if it weren't for the labor camps and the weapons of spiritual mass destruction, the viewer would be on her side, which is why Breik threw those things in with all the grace and subtlety of a car crash, and just make her a generic dictator. But the story would have worked so much better if she wasn't just made into metal-bending Stalin, and have the rumors about her be no more than that, because that would have made more sense. Kuvira was adopted into the Beifong family and grew up in Zaofu, a place of stability and equality unlike the rest of the Earth Kingdom. Why wouldn't she want that for the rest of her people? It makes sense that she would try to bring that to everyone. But writing that would be hard, because not only would Breik have to not include a villain, they'd have to make it similar to the Civil War story and make everyone's take on the subject just kinda shit, because nobody has had to deal with instability on this level before, and Breik have shown time and time again they don't actually want to write that kind of story, so they just make her a fascist and leave it at that. There's a scene I keep coming back to when I think about the season, and it's when Toph and Korra are discussing the previous villains of the show.
What did Amon want? Equality for all. Unaloq, he brought back the spirits. And Zahir believed in freedom.
I guess.
The problem was those guys were totally out of balance. rebels, and they took their ideologies too far.
This is the writers just lying to you. Amon didn't want equality, his entire shtick was being a liar who wanted to destroy bending because his daddy was mean. And Unaloq didn't bring back shit, that was all Korra. Unaloq wanted to bring about 10,000 years of darkness for reasons that still make no sense. Also, I know the show is averse to giving Korra any fucking credit, but this should have been the moment where she stood up and said, "That was me, I did that." It's stupid how even now the writers are still trying to minimize her. Also, we just went over how Zahir didn't believe in anything, he was just spewing the agenda of the Red Lotus. Zahir didn't have a motivation to speak of, just a bunch of empty philosophy to give the illusion he had anything of substance to say. This scene is the writers trying to retcon your perception of the show, so you forget how they fundamentally fumbled the execution. But more than that, it's trying to establish a narrative through line of people with good intentions taking things too far, so you associate that theme with Kuvira, because they didn't actually want to put in the effort of showing her doing anything. And it just does not work, because at this point in the show, the worst thing Kuvira has actually done is vaguely threaten Zaofu, but none of her supposed crimes are ever shown. Because that would have required work, and it should be pretty clear by now that Break are just averse to putting in any kind of fucking work for their villains. But this is where we come to the crux of my issue, because as much as Kuvira would have worked better if she wasn't a villain, okay, I know this is going to sound really immature, but Kuvira's fun. Like, she's the single most fun villain in the show. She's always in control, she takes massive gambits and always outplays everyone else, and she kicks the ass of anyone who tries to fight her. She's like if Azula could metal bend, and Azula was the most fun villain in the entirety of The Last Airbender. She's so in control and conceited that she'd mug for the camera in the middle of a fight, and Kuvira is right there with her doing that smug little dance.
Looks like the Avatar is a little off her game.
You cheeky bastard. And while the giant fucking mech is objectively stupid and also raises the question of how the hell she kept the thing a fucking secret, because I don't care how many metal benders you have on staff, the amount of resources alone would make hiding that impossible. Well, it's a fucking giant mech with a spirit laser beam cannon. That's really fucking fun. It makes my inner 5-year-old hop up and down in excitement. This is where I struggle so much, because Kuvira is the kind of villain the show needed all along. Someone with the charm and power and sheer personality to hype you up while priming you for when she finally gets her ass kicked. She's fun. Now, keeping all that in mind, here are the changes I would suggest. Back in my video on the supporting cast, I talked about how it made no sense for Su Yin to decide to just not fucking do anything when she was asked for help unifying the Earth Kingdom, and that's because it doesn't. Even if she doesn't want to force her views on people, they're not asking her to become a ruler, they're asking her to help keep people safe. So I would have her actually agree at first, and I'd have Kuvira go with her to help as her second in command, the way Batara Jr. did for Kuvira herself. The reunification process takes a long time, only nearing completion after 3 years have passed, and what I would do is, sometime in the middle of that period, maybe a year or so after starting, have Su Yin drop out of the effort. She's become tired of not seeing her family and tired of arguing with Raiko, growing disillusioned with the project upon realizing that it would leave the kingdom as a puppet state. Feeling like she can't win and doesn't have the energy to go through with it, she'd leave and Kuvira would take over. As I mentioned before, Kuvira was just a normal person when this all started, and she's been put in charge of an endeavor that should be the Avatar's job, but that Korra can't actually do because she's been crippled by the Red Lotus and needs to recover. Hell, Kuvira was there when that happened, and while you could make the argument she might resent Korra for not helping her country, I think part of the reason why Kuvira would want to do this at all is to give Korra time to recover. I mean, that would certainly explain why Bolin is helping. However, 3 years of working on this, of fighting bandits and governors who won't cooperate and having to witness the suffering of the people firsthand would also harden her. She would start using tactics that she'd never have considered before this whole thing started. The camps would probably just have began as her trying to move people out of a dangerous territory when they refused to, and she definitely didn't start out by threatening the leaders of territories, but time and stress can change a person. I think instead of just saying the power went to her head and writing the entire thing off, it would have been far more interesting to get a glimpse at how the duty changed her, how she began making what she considered at the time to be hard but necessary decisions, and then slowly start convincing herself that they're the only way. Kind of in a similar vein to Spec Ops: The Line, just less monstrous overall. Exploring what leads someone to fall from grace like that is far more interesting than just acting like they were bad from the start, or just writing it off as them going power mad. Yes, she ultimately becomes a fascist, but exploring how she got there could be a fascinating story. This also ties into how I said I'd change the way Korra's poison fix would work. Since I've killed Zahir and changed the poison's function, I would actually put the poison removal after Korra and Kuvira battle over Zaofu. I'd keep the fight itself basically the same, but what I would change is that instead of moving to kill Korra and forcing Opal and Jinora to save her, I'd have Kuvira essentially have a small breakdown. She'd go off about how Korra has no idea what it's been like having to do everything herself. Maybe talk about how disappointed she is that Korra's back and this is all she amounted to. Really get into the heart of her stress and give us a glimpse behind the mask. It's only after all this that I'd essentially have her leave Korra for the two airbenders to handle, and then they'd take her back to Toph, where they could have a real fucking talk about trauma and responsibility before Korra finally removes what's left of the poison herself. I'd have her struggle though, as each drop brings up another memory of her enemies, with Toph and her friends talking her through each one. It'd be a lot better than the bullshit they pulled with Zahir, that's for sure. You know, despite how the season really wants you to see her as just another Ozai, it's always been somewhat odd to me that they still try to salvage her character. Because after all the times you're supposed to believe she's gone too far, from proclaiming the new Earth Empire to threatening to drop Varric from the train, to trying to zap Baatar Jr., she's still given this scene at the end.
This wasn't how I wanted things to end. If you had all just surrendered, none of this would have happened.
You brought this on yourself. Messing with the spirit vines, acting like a dictator over your people. You had to know what you were doing wasn't right.
I was trying to help my people. Sue turned her back on the Earth Kingdom. You were gone. I had to do something.
I think I get it now.
You don't understand anything about me.
I do. Sue told me how she took you in when you were younger. It must have been so hard being an orphan.
Don't pretend you know what it felt like. The Avatar is adored by millions. I was cast aside by my own parents like I meant nothing to them. How could I just stand by and watch the same thing happen to my nation when it needed someone to guide it?
You wanted to create a place where you and your people would never be vulnerable again. I may not have been an orphan, but believe me, I understand what it feels like to be afraid. After I was poisoned, I would have done anything to feel in control.
It really makes me wonder if they didn't have something like what I suggested planned from the start. This kind of motivation would work so much better if she didn't go full dictator, or at the very least if the viewer was allowed to see what got her to that point. And the thing is, I like this scene. I think it's one of the better and more intimate scenes that the show has, but it's made less impactful by how the show has framed Kuvira until now. So, you know what? I say keep this for my version. Keep this scene. Keep Kuvira's attempt to reclaim Republic City for the Earth Empire. Keep in the stupid fucking giant robot laser beams. But emphasize Kuvira's motivation and struggles more. Put more focus on the way she parallels Korra herself. Make this scene even stronger because it's really good. And I wish it could have been given what it needed to really hit home. It feels like the writers were torn when they made Kuvira. Even people who are critical of Bryke's writing tend to look favourably on her, and that's largely because they pulled another Ozai. But she also has these fleeting glimpses of humanity that demonstrate a more complicated person under all that weapons-grade smug, and as a result, she comes off as torn herself. Torn between having a really fun dramatic villain like Ozai or Azula, and having a contemplative villain that remarks on the weight of responsibility and leadership. Kuvira could have been so many things, and been so fucking good too, if the actual work was put in. But then that's been the running theme with all of these villains, hasn't it? Glimpses of brilliance hidden under laziness and poor execution. Fuck, that might as well be the tagline for the whole show. Thank you for watching, and a huge thanks to my Patreon supporters for keeping me afloat, with a special thanks to Owen Oofs and Lustrous Lizard. I've been both looking forward to and dreading this video for a while now, because it's the one I was the least sure of. I've never tried something like this before, and I was kind of nervous. But I really do think there was a lot of potential in these characters. It was just never fully realised, and I did have fun coming up with all this. I do have one last video on Korra I'm planning on, and then I'm going to get around to working on that video on the gang I threatened to make last time. I'll just need to rewatch the whole of The Last Airbender to do it properly. Oh no, poor me, right? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed listening to my idiot ramblings for the last hour, and I hope you have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!